Hi, I'm Lena. Welcome to part 2 of what is affirmative action. If you haven't seen part 1, hop on over to that video. It's about 10 minutes long and I talk briefly about what is affirmative action, what it's not, and some historical context about it. Short disclaimer, I have experience working in universities and programs doing admissions. I can't speak for all programs, but with my education, my experience, and the research I've done, I feel like I can accurately portray what the majority of programs and universities do. Secondly, just a reminder that all colleges, universities, and programs have different admissions processes. There can also be a ton of different processes on just one campus. So what admissions looks like for undergraduates on one campus, very different from admissions to an MBA program, which is very different from admissions to a human medical program. So there's a lot of variance, and those processes change often. We're constantly wanting to update our processes so they're as equitable and fair as possible, and so they're going to change. Lastly, a couple definitions. So I'm going to just use the word school in terms of when I'm referring to colleges and universities. Yes, there's a difference between colleges and universities. School's just easier. And then when I say programs, I mean programs that you have to apply to, which can be undergrad. There can be a closed major like social work you may have to apply to be admitted, and then graduate school, which you have to apply to. So I mean just programs kind of more generally speaking. Okay, so first we're gonna talk about why do we need admissions? Well, first one being there's obviously not enough seats for everyone. So that's a common sense one, obviously. Second is what we commonly think of with admissions is who is academically qualified and going to succeed in the school. That's part of the picture actually. And there's a second part that I feel like the public often doesn't understand or know, is that the second purpose of admissions is not only to find students who are going to do well and who are academically excellent, but also to find students who are going to do well and fit the culture of the school and contribute to the school culture and the school community. That's different on every school, right? Some programs may put emphasis on something like community service or being involved in your community. Others may put emphasis on something else. And so admissions processes, yes, we want students to succeed, we want them to do well, we also want them to fit in with the school. And fit in can be very nebulous, I get that. So that's why it's usually tied back to the school or program mission. Just like businesses, schools and programs have mission statements. And so that second piece of admissions processes is going to be tied to the mission statement. So what are they set out to do as a university or program? And then that's tied to the type of students they're looking for. All right, so let's get into what the processes are. So here we have the two major ones. I'll get into them in a second. The first is open enrollment, which I don't need to go into in detail because it's a community college, for instance. You apply and you're admitted. Typically, they're just looking for a high school diploma or equivalent education. There are some four-year universities that are open enrollment, not a ton. So that's the first process in which none of this admission stuff applies. So the next one I'm going to talk about is metrics. This isn't a standard or universal term. I'm just using it because it makes the most sense to me. Metrics is really straightforward. They're looking at GPA or GPAs and test scores. That's pretty much it. So GPA, if you're applying as a high school student to undergraduate, they're going to look at your high school GPA. If you're applying to graduate school, they're going to look at your undergraduate GPA. Depending on the discipline, they may also look at all science courses or all liberal arts courses, or, which is pretty common in graduate admissions, they're looking at your most 2 recent years of coursework. That's for multiple reasons. One is usually you're in your major in your last 2 years of undergrad, and students tend to do better in their major and in their last 2 years, so that GPA is higher. Whatever the GPA is, it's one of the metrics. And then test scores, obviously that would be the SAT or ACT for undergraduates. Grad school would be a GRE, or a professional school would require like the LSAT for law school. Very clearly stated objectives metrics that are being used. Most, if not all, colleges have online applications these days. And so when an application is submitted, if they're going just off of metrics, chances are there's a formula kind of built into the system that will automatically rank students. Let's say they want 50% of that formula to be the GPA, 50% test scores. I don't know. Everybody's a little different, right? So that's in the system. Let's say 1,000 students applied for 100 seats. We're talking about a professional program, right? They have 100 seats. And so they would put everyone into the system who, of course, has a complete application. They're ranked based off the formula, and they just take that top 100, offer them admissions. Super straightforward. Second one, more complex, is holistic. And this is the appropriate word that's universally used in admissions, is holistic. It is what it sounds like. You're looking at the entire applicant. Yes, you have the GPAs, maybe test scores. It might be optional, or they don't require it at all. Essays, so there are typically, you could say, a main personal statement or questions tied specifically to the discipline, or maybe they're asking for a research paper, something in the writing essay world. Recommendations, these can be qualitative, so just formal letters from former supervisors or professors, and actually there could be both, a quantitative metric, so a Likert scale where they're evaluating an applicant based on certain criteria. You know, a scale of 1 to 5, how would you rank them on reliability? And then a number comes up from that. And so that could be used in this kind of whole formula. Experience hours. This is more so for graduate and professional schools, especially disciplines tied to licensure. So I don't want someone applying to med school never having stepped foot in hospital, right? So they want to make sure students have a decent understanding of the profession. They'll often get recommendations from within those field hours. There might be a minimum, so maybe you need 500 minimum hours to apply to physician's assistant program. Or maybe it's just encouraged, the more the better. For undergrad, usually not a requirement. It might be community service hours, if anything. Maybe a school requires that. Extracurriculars. This is more significant, again, on the undergrad level, maybe not on the other levels. So this is where you're looking at clubs, community service, leadership. And then lastly is they're looking at your personal traits. I don't mean your blood type or your Myers-Briggs personality type. I mean where they're able to, your sex, your ethnicity, if that's reported, your socioeconomic status. So typically they're going to want to know who's low income. If you have or claim to have any sort of disability that you'd like to disclose. Some schools ask for LGBTQ status. They may ask, I'm trying to think of anything else, where you live, just based off of kind of your city or your zip code. So those are the personal traits. A holistic review process has typically a rubric that will have categories for each of what they're looking at. And each category will have a weight. What it makes it holistic is there's not one category that would kind of supersede all the rest. Meaning, if you have a 4.0 GPA, but low test scores and everything else is just not very strong, doesn't really mean you're gonna get it. Conversely, you may have a 2.7 GPA and everything else is also really strong, you might get it. So the rubric is usually established by the admissions committee, and going back to the goal of admissions is obviously students who can do well in the program, students who will contribute to the school community, enhance the learning environment for others. And so they can kind of tailor, what the weights are of each category to what they're looking for. And then they are ranked and evaluated, offered admission from there. Okay, so the last one, which I'll mention, is a combination of the two. Is you may first initially rank applicants, and then you take 500 out of 1,000, let's say, and then those 500 are reviewed holistically. So that creates kind of a multi-layer approach to the admissions process. It also cuts down on work. To holistically review 1,000 applicants, schools do this, by the way, it's a lot of work, but at least in the mix, maybe you're just whittling it down to the highest portion of students who are in the metrics, and then you look at them holistically. So that's the mix. Now we know what they are, let's talk about why they exist. Metrics is easy. It is black and white, very little human engagement, because like I said, often it's kind of a ranking based off of computer generation. Super easy. It's black and white, but we're not black and white, meaning we're all gray area, right? We are our sum total of parts. And so because this is essentially equating scores and numbers with ability, a lot of schools are moving away from just metrics and holistic. Holistic is something you're going to see more of in this day and age, or a combination of the two. So holistic on one hand is a lot more labor intensive. You have to have admissions committee members trained and understanding the whole process, and they review each application with a rubric. If you have a high volume of applicants, you may have to churn through applications one every 6 to 7 minutes. That's the kind of number on the Ivy League scale, given how competitive it is and how many applicants they get. So it's a pro and a con that it takes so long, but you're able to see the entire person, and you can really tailor what you're looking at and the emphasis you give it in your rubric to, again, the main end goal, which is what are you looking for in a student? Your GPA and your test scores tell us only so much. And so that's where personal traits and then often extenuating circumstances come in. If you do not have a 4.0, but you have really great writing skills, and from your essays and your recommendation and your personal traits, we know that you're a first-generation college student, which is underrepresented, by the way, and I'm a first-generation college student. They are underrepresented in the college, I think in all colleges for the most part. That'll tell us a little bit. You don't have that guidance that someone whose parents and grandparents went to college, or the expectation either. We could also see maybe through in the personal traits or through the essays, maybe you had a family member who was ill your senior year of college and your grades suffered. So you were on track to have a 4.0, but because of something that happened outside of your control, your grades suffered a bit. You can look at that and see the whole person. I would argue this in and of itself is affirmative action, because it is granting those who have been historically excluded from colleges and places of employment from being considered holistically. Because someone who doesn't have the top GPA, and we'll get way more into this in the next presentation, may not have the resources to get them that GPA. I'll go on in the future, but I think we could argue that this is actually affirmative action in and of itself. And then think about from your perspective. You're applying to a school. Don't you want them to know more about you than just these? I do, especially if you're going into a field. Just because you have a high GPA, are you going to be a good doctor? Not necessarily. So that is a rundown of the entire process, or processes that can occur. I will cover in the next video what it looks like in action to review college applications and to put affirmative action into work. Because in order to answer why affirmative action, we first have to know, what does admissions look like, first of all? Because there's a lot of misconceptions out there. And then secondly, we have to know, how does it look like in practice when we are looking at these, and why? Hint, the why involves a lot of historical and social context, which I will cover. Thank you for watching. If you have any feedback, please let me know. You're welcome to fact check me. If you give me a thumbs down, that's no feedback. If you're giving me a thumbs down because you don't like my face, tell me. Or if you're giving me a thumbs down because you disagree, tell me. The educator in me wants to know. Thank you, and hopefully I'll see you for part 3.